Hi, OD. How are you going?
I'm very well, thanks, Debbie. Very well.
Very well. So for those of you who haven't seen our previous interview with Ian O'Dwyer from SOMA and OD on Movement, we got OD coming over to Australia, Albany, WA to be precise, to do a couple of workshops over 3 or 4 days. So one of them is going to be the SOMA Immersion 1, which some people have seen around the world at the moment, which is pretty exciting. And then we're going to be running a shorter 4-hour workshop. So this one is designed around human performance. So I've got to ask, what is human performance? I've got one version of it, which I now, if you had asked me 10 years ago what human performance was, it would have been that person, that high-level athlete in the Olympics running those ultra marathons. To me, that was human performance. But now, understanding a little differently about the body, I wouldn't say a little more, but I just understand things differently now. Human performance is a lot of people's ability to get out of bed. It's a lot of people's ability to survive a day with their kids. It's the ability to get out there and enjoy work, not just do work, but really enjoy it. And to enjoy it, we've got to be comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So human performance for me, what is it for you, OD?
It's a pretty big question, isn't it? Human performance. And it's interesting because what I've discovered is, and what Rodney has discovered, and this is the beautiful thing about where SOMA is going now, is that the basis of human performance doesn't change for anyone. Human performance is really about wellness. Wellness is about being able to connect to the tissues, being able to be aware of the stimulus that comes into the tissues, being able to act upon what those tissues require to be at their optimal best, both from a nutritional and hydrational perspective, both from a movement perspective, both from an emotional perspective and recovery perspective, and also from a spiritual. Once you get into that further, and that's not about believing in God. That's about understanding and being a great person and how that comes into your perspective, your environment, your life. So human performance will be. Don't get me wrong. In this workshop for 4 hours, we will touch on the elite athlete. We will touch on, because I've played sport at a semi-professional level, and I want to talk to people about what it's like to be broken physically, but how that affects the mental and how that affects the emotion, and how we change it and how we recondition those athletes to come back and become more beneficial, more effective, more optimal in their performance. I want to talk about also the pre and postnatal mum who now has a child who hasn't slept for 2 weeks, whose pelvic floor is struggling, who is in a situation where they've got self-esteem issues, the anxiety is going through there. I want to talk about how we change their tissues, what we do for them. How do we create a quality of life? How do we allow them to perform at their optimum? I want to talk about the person who is 65, 70 going into dementia, going into Alzheimer's, because now a lot of my clients are, and I've been fortunate to work with some of the best around the world in that field of neuroscience and seeing what we can do and understanding what we can do to help people in that area. And I want to talk about the youth, because the youth is so important, and I see now on a daily basis, people have got to understand when you are working with a young person, you are not just a coach, you are potentially a parent. You are potentially a father or mother, because that person may not have them in their household. So if that's the case, we've got to understand what type of language. We've got to understand, what do they really want to do when they come to this training environment? Do they want to be told like they have been at school or have been at home? Or do they want to feel like this is their only sanctuary? And do they trust you enough to be guided by you to move so that they have confidence that they're not going to break down? Or do they know that you're going to bully them and push them into a corner, and who knows what's going to happen from there? So in 4 hours, we're going to do all of that.
Yeah. And when you're talking about all those different levels within different communities, you got your pregnant mum, you've got your sports person, you've got your elderly person heading into dementia, you've got your youth. We're really talking about trauma, because we've got mums that go through the trauma of birth, the trauma of actually growing a human inside them. We've got those sideline traumas, we're on the sideline, we're coaching, we're watching these sports go ahead, and then they experience the trauma on the field. So in coming off the field, we're treating that trauma and how it goes in emotionally, how it's going to affect their life, like you say, not only on the field, on the track, in life, but how it's going to affect their self-talk.
So trauma will be a perspective of it, but maybe we'll talk let's talk about it in a manner that maybe is more about life. It's a force, it's an energy. And how does the tissues respond to those forces or those energies? Because the trauma will be the emotional aspect of it. Everything we do has an ecstasy, and everything we do has a trauma. you know, if I walk up those stairs and I've kicked my toe, well, walking up the stairs, I'm coming into work, which I love, but I've just kicked my toe now, which is trauma.
Yeah.
You know, if I go onto the footy field, I'm playing a sport that I love, but all of a sudden now I've twisted my ankle, I've got, you know, I've tweaked my knee, or I've got hit behind the back of the head, and all of a sudden now I've had a trauma. I still love the sport. So what we'll do is we'll talk about the forces and the loads that come into the tissue, but what can we do to change those forces and loads on all of the levels? Because I believe, Bevy, as you believe, that as soon as we start using the word trauma, it becomes very, very roadblockish. It becomes very negative to people, right? Because people have been biasly told previously from other people that they've had trauma in their life. Now, trauma is a natural occurring exercise that happens in our life. Everyone has trauma at some stage.
Yeah.
If we just could understand in a very short period of time how we could take that trauma from being a negative into a positive through movement or motion, because motion changes emotion and emotion changes motion. So if we looked at movement and we then had a revisit of how we feel, how does that make us feel on an emotional status? Because we know that with force and load into tissue, if it is a trauma, if it is something that isn't addressed, it will then be buried in the tissue. We have to get that out of the tissue. So really, it's another way of self-care, isn't it? It's really another way of saying, how do I help the tissue heal? How do I help the tissue feel better? How do I help the tissue prepare? How do I help the tissue recover? How do I help the tissue perform? And it's really about being able to, look at all of these consequences of these people in their lives that they live, and look at the common denominators of what they need to do to help them live the quality of life they deserve.
Yeah. And it's breaking down and understanding the language barrier, I think, too, right? So, you know, a language barrier, we talk about things in the body. I've got a tight hamstring, or I've got tight calves, or we've got this language barrier where we think that it's a bad thing, or we think that it's a thing, but we're going to discuss a little bit in the human performance about that tissue and what we're saying versus what is actually happening. So for that person who doesn't understand the breakdowns of the tissue, we can help them understand what we're saying and try and measure that up with what's actually happening in the body.
Because our industry is such a young industry, Bevy, we have created terminologies, we've created ways of putting things into boxes, and you know, we've biased a lot of things that, you know, I know I've told people that, you know, to get a strong core, this means that, or if you're feeling that means tight, that means you've got to do this. Well, I now know that doesn't mean that at all. What I now know is that if we just have the humility to step back, don't throw out what we know, but step back and actually observe what we feel, we're going to find there's quite a different outcome or different solution to what we initially thought. So for instance, to give credit to what you've just said then, you know, we can lay a person on a table, on a massage table, and we can take measurements of their, you know, hip range of motion, or their knee range of motion, or their ankle range of motion in what we would call an isolated effect. So we could just take it and we could say, right, the hamstring is tight, or the calf is restricted, whatever the terminology you may want to use. But then we could take that same person and put them up in a room and get them to start moving, and we would find that the stuff that we found on the table wouldn't have a carryover to the way that person moves. Now, there's lots of reasons. It may be the fact that as soon as that person stands up, that gravity, ground force, mass and momentum, it actions the tissues to respond in a certain way, because that person's been a sports person all their life, and when they lay down, that means in what the body's saying to them is, oh, this is sleep time. But when they stand up, this is go time. So their tissues can respond very differently from a table to what they can do in a standing up. So we've got to be very careful about the language. Exactly right. It's a great point. Because if we bias people by saying I've got a tight muscle, but in fact we find that the tissue is not tight, then what we may be doing is creating more of a headache, more of a problem than more of a solution by the actions we are taking.
And we're highlighting a symptom too when we talk about that all the time. So again, in the 4-hour workshop that we're doing, if there is symptomatic approaches, how are we going to get that through that in 4 hours where a coach, a therapist, an everyday person, the end user that might want to come along to that 4-hour workshop, what are we going to find out about in there? How can we understand that? How can we take a hold of that?
That's a really, really great question. It's a very powerful question. Firstly, we're going to understand about relationships. And it's funny because it keeps coming back to relationships when we talk about the body. We're going to talk about what the muscle does, and we're going to talk about what fascia does. We're going to talk about what bones do, what nerves do, what the mechanoreceptors of fascia are, and how they respond back into the brains. And the brains of the body aren't just one brain. We've got a number of brains that have to all have a relationship once again with each other. So what we will do in this 4 hours is we'll identify some areas of the human being that have commonalities across the board. And when we identify them, we're going to start to work through them and look at some movements that we should be able to perform no matter who or what we are, whether we're elderly, whether we're a child, whether we're pre or postnatal, whether we're an elite athlete, or whether we're just like you and me. Because I can guarantee you, as you have seen, as I've seen in my practice regularly, all 5 of those areas, most people struggle with movement.
Yeah.
And it may not be because they can't move. It may be because the pattern in their body that's being driven by the environment, because they can't breathe, they're not sleeping, their nutrition's poor, because the environment of where they're working. There can be a number of things that can be driving their movement. But until we start to identify that, well, then we can't change their outcome. We can't create the solution. So in 4 hours, we're going to basically identify a common denominator of what people need. We're going to look at some movement patterns, and then we're going to start to implement some strategies that we can put in to create and improve those patterns in the tissues.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then after that 4 hours, people are going to go off and go about their lives. How does that relationship then go on with you? So people are going to be able to contact you after that 4-hour workshop. You're going to be available. You've got a website also. Yep.
So, Bevi, the biggest thing about that is always the fact that, you know, from a SOMA perspective, we are big on communication. We're big on community. The thing I love is that I've got people like you on the ground who are doing amazing work. So I've got people that can be spoken to. In other words, they can contact you or they can contact me. You've got my details. And I have full respect and trust that if you're handing them out, they need to have a chat to me. So, you know, we've got access to lots of pre-existing information from workouts to movements and down the track with SOMA in the very near future, we're going to have online content as well, which will be a huge bonus because it'll mean sitting on planes for us, which isn't very exciting, won't be as often as it has been. So, but yeah, there's plenty of access to information. This 4-hour workshop is really about putting your toe in the water. Do you want to invest? Do you want to be challenged? Or are you comfortable sitting in your own playfield? Because trust me, the one thing I know is we don't know. The stuff that we think we know about movement, the stuff that we think we know about conditioning, the stuff that we think we know about rehabilitation, it may not be wrong, but it certainly may not be complete. So we'll certainly bring some stuff to the table in this 4 hours that will be challenging. I can guarantee you that. But it will also be practical. And the biggest thing it will be is if you come with an open mind, I can assure you, you'll leave with tools to help your practice, help you, and help your clients to move, feel, and live better.
And that's great too. And that's a really good thing I like, is because there's no right and wrong way. There's no right or wrong answer. We're not looking at changing anyone's perspective or belief. We're looking at enhancing that perspective and getting them to understand that it can complete that circle. It can start to have little adaptations in there. They can use this along with the knowledge they already have and take it from there.
Bevi, it's been really interesting going to China, how many yoga instructors are now starting to come to our course because of the fact that they're finding that a lot of their clients can't get into the positions that they need them to. So they're now doing some various types of SOMA techniques to help them. So it's cool because, once again, we're not the ones, SOMA's not the answer for everything. It is purely an add-on. We are an advanced education, advanced movement organisation that enables you to create self-care of your tissues and your tissue awareness through being able to move better, being able to feel better, and being able to live better. And if we can do that, then we are just purely going to work with people, work with business, from business to business, and help create solutions rather than create this breakdown or this fragmentation, which is happening constantly in the industry now.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Well, we're going to leave it there now with OD. And guys, if you want to get on out there and register for this, my contact details are going to be attached to this interview. I will put some details there for OD as well. If you feel like you want to send OD an email or you want to give him a call, then feel free to go that way. But yeah, we look forward to hopefully seeing you in the studio or having a chat with you, answering some more questions.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to being in Albany and having a really, really open conversation about what's happening, where we're going, but also then applying some stuff that really starts to challenge what we know, Becky. So I'm really excited, especially after what we did last time. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks for that, OD. Great talk.
You too. See ya.